Welcome to Bonehead. We've been off a week. I apologize.
Let's take a small moment.
Hold on.
I want to talk about what just happened.
Yeah.
How many times have we done this, and we've done it from Zoom? And this is also counting the fun sizes we do for Good Movie Monday.
The last 2 years.
How many times do you have a problem hitting the record button?
Every damn time.
I've got another question. You're going to tell these people that you've been off. Let's just lay the cards on the table as an intervention. Sure. Joe was in rehab. He's been chasing the dragon. You're thinking I'm using a drug reference. No, there's an actual dragon Joe has to chase. It's actually one of those small
Hold
wizards.
on, can I make one lame joke?
Yeah.
Fuck Pete.
Oh, I was gonna say Pete Dragon's butthole is sitting there crying like a baby.
Okay. Funny story. I
don't know, James. It wasn't what was going to come. That's what just came out. I'm sorry.
I'm pretty sure I saw the original Pete's Dragon when I was a kid, but I don't really remember it, and I've never seen the other one. So I'm gonna.
No. I'll defend the other one.
I won't defend either one. Both of them are terrible.
No. Well, the original has a couple mute songs in it, and I have a soft spot for it because I used to be able to watch it. Now that being said, when fights them supers and one of them's a dragon, that's a good time.
So we were on vacation.
Carl Urban's in it, right? He's in the remake.
I still say we need to talk about Joe not being able to hit the record button.
He's chasing the dragon.
I also couldn't figure out where the sharing button was either, and I do it at work all the damn time. Where the hell was that at again? By the way, so we were gone. So sorry for that. We missed a week. I've looked at our numbers. We just talked about our numbers. I don't know where you guys went, but you sure were listening last year more than this year. You guys must be traveling. You can listen to us in the car. The kids could learn a lot from us.
Which is why we're picking a topic that is so popular today in pulp culture that it's just going to send a bunch of people away from this podcast because we're going to sound like complete idiots.
Doily knitting. So we're going to finally get into the history of doilies.
This was my idea. And it's just been on my mind so much because my kid has two obsessions. One of them is Ghostbusters, and
then finding his real father.
And then finding his real father. And then maybe the next time he leaves, he'll leap back into his real parents' home.
I don't know how Joe found the one remaining milkman in the entire United States.
You mean how Christy? You mean how Christy found the one?
No. I mean how you found him, and then Christy found him.
I didn't have any part of this. So Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I've had to endure those movies over and over now for the last few months. And we read the books. We talk about the characters. I get to do these Comic-Cons and talk to people about it because I don't read a lot of comic books. And Spider-Man is more popular now than ever. Spider-Man No Way Home this December in the middle of a COVID surge, right?
Yeah.
Of an Omicron COVID surge made $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Not million, billion worldwide. Am I close on that? I actually haven't learned.
I don't know the totals, but it was
past, but remember,
yeah,
it was past. We're talking about Star Wars Rise of the or whatever. I forgot the name of the first Star Wars movie.
Just making stuff up now.
Yeah, Death of the blah 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 blah. Anyway, I mean, incredible numbers in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah,
Spider-Man is huge, and I want to talk about it because I don't know that I know all of the history. Now, Chad, you said Spider-Man was created in 1962.
1962, but James wants to cover some stuff before we get into 1962.
Real quick,
who is he?
1.9 billion worldwide, by the way.
1.9.
And James, I got a question for you before we get into the history, though, because Spider-Man's in my top 10 of comic book heroes, and I am merging Marvel and DC. I don't know if I probably won't give you that list today, but I
prefer DC over Marvel.
I do prefer DC over Marvel, except for the exception of Spider-Man and Iron Man.
Spider-Man and all the cool ones.
No, I was going to say, and then a couple X-Men, and then also Hawkeye. But I've always
don't get Chad started on his love of Forge.
I've always loved Spider-Man. He's always been in my top 10. James, has he always been one of your personal favorites or not?
Oh, he was the first superhero comic. I owned other comics before that. There were movie adaptations, Indiana Jones, stuff like that. But the first superhero comic I got my hands on was an early, probably in the first 10 issues. I think it was The Web of Spider-Man. I still have it. I sealed it in plastic because it changed my world. It really did. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I think, and we'll get into this obviously, but I think it's because Spider-Man's life sucks. I mean, it doesn't matter what's going on.
And that's go ahead. Sorry.
He doesn't have a good day. I mean, he'll have a good day.
I said,
but there's always,
there's
also
Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's kind of, and
so he's just more identifiable.
Yeah, because that's the one thing I was kind of, and I agree. That's the whole reason why I think Spider-Man's popular, because if you look at it, his powers are kind of lame. He can crawl. He can crawl on walls. He has a sixth sense, and he
has a Peter Tingle,
and he has a little bit of super strength.
Depends on what you're looking at. Depends on the movie, actually, of how much super strength he has.
I agree. But yeah, it's all. But that's every superhero movie you look at.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things that really, and so that kind of leads into what we'll be talking about a little bit, is that Spider-Man almost didn't happen because of the people in control of Marvel Comics at the time. One person in particular.
Yeah, we'll get into him, but you're gonna go a little before 1962, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So a little bit. So Marvel,
which by the way, I have no idea how you're going before 1962. So I'm just going to sit down for the ride and stop talking, because I don't know where James's mind goes past the actual creation of the character.
If there's books like this is my old beat up copy, The Origin of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee, and as you can tell, it's an old book. I got this at Half Price Books. I found it, and it was actually $3, and I was like, I'm taking it home because it's hard to find. It's actually relatively easy to find, but it's hard to find an older copy of it. That being said, Marvel Comics, Stan Lee is linked forever to Marvel Comics up until, and actually even after, his passing. But that wasn't obviously always the case. Martin Goodman was born Mo Goodman. Started going by Martin. He lived until 1992, but he was originally the editor of what would become Marvel Comics. He worked in pulp comics, pulp books, pulp everything. And so he published pulp magazines, paperbacks, men's adventures magazines, comic books, and he would launch what would eventually become, obviously, Marvel Comics, but it started out as Timely. And so going back in 1933, he was working for Louis Silberkleit, which, by the way, sounds like it could be a villain's name in a comic book in and of itself. And he formed a partnership with, and I'm not making any of this up, look it up, the Shade. So the Shade Brothers, Louis Silberkleit, and they started what was called Philadelphia Newsstand Publications. Eventually, it would end up becoming another company, but they ended up, so it was taken over by Goodman by himself because he paid off a debt to W.F. Hall. Silberkleit and somebody else, Coyne, joined John L. Goldwater to form Archie Comics. So Marvel Comics and Archie Comics, actually at one point, the people behind them were working at the same place. Useless trivia. Now, that being said, his business strategy was basically, let's make money. I'm going to put out whatever it takes. We're going to constantly publish something. So he started doing whatever was the hit at the time. All-star adventure fiction, complete Western was actually that was one title. Mystery Tales was another one that he published. Real Sports, Star Detectives, science fiction magazines, and the science fiction magazine he called Marvel Science Stories. And it featured an early Tarzan-like character named Tarzan-like character named Kazar. Timely Comics become the umbrella for his entire comics division. And eventually, of course, it evolves into Marvel Comics. Joe Simon becomes the first editor. 1939, Marvel Comics #1s hit the newsstand with the old Human Torch, which was an android,
which was
and
an
a
android,
reprint of Bill Everett's Namor the Submariner. By 1941, Timely started to publish the work of Simon and Kirby.
I'm just really hoping James at somehow point starts talking about the Wizard again and how such a great comic book character he was. In reality, he sucked.
What?
So anyway, it was the Invaders. So during the war, Joe, there were all these heroes, right? You had Captain America. Well, Captain America before the Avengers completely left out of the Marvel Comics universe, which is actually a shame. You had the Invaders. The Invaders were the superheroes that you dropped behind enemy lines, led by Captain America. That's why he was a captain.
Like the Dirty Dozen?
Yeah. And they went to fight Hitler. That was the Invaders. And the Wizard ran fast. That he was one of those characters.
Got his powers from being bitten by a mongoose. And Joe, you obviously don't remember our first live show because I went on a tangent about the Wizard.
No, Chad, I don't. I just don't.
Yeah.
So Captain America.
I love it when I get those questions and I go, no, it sounds good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Captain America, created by Simon and Kirby, runs from 39. But in 1941, Simon and Kirby both go, nope, we're done with
we're still 20 years away from actually talking about Spider-Man.
It's going to go really fast here in a second.
Okay.
They walk away. So Goodman realizes, oh, crap, I just lost my talent. And I want to make money dollars. So what am I going to do? Well, it turns out that he had allegedly a cousin, maybe a second cousin. I'm sure there's somewhere that will give you the full information. I do not have that. I just found that it was a cousin who was working in publication, but didn't really want to be linked to comic books. He went by Stan Lee.
Yeah.
So he appoints Stan Lee as Timely's editor. And of course, Stan Lee effectively never leaves. He does eventually leave. But post-war, all of a sudden, there's a lessening interest in superheroes. After the Invaders start to be forgotten. All these comics start to be forgotten. The war is over. People are wanting action comics. But they're not wanting these superheroes anymore. So Timely, for a brief period of time, goes by Atlas Comics. They do, global stuff. But then in 1961, they're slowly eking along. Stan Lee is still the editor, but it's not overly going great. And all of a sudden, Mr. Goodman, basically, he's playing golf. And he's playing golf with one of those publishers of that other company that Chad talked about. And that other company is seeing a resurgence in a certain type of comic. That would be the superheroes. And Chad, what is the team that they have?
You talking about the Justice League?
The Justice League. The Justice League is selling. It's outselling all these Western comics that Goodman has been pushing Stan Lee to get out. So he goes back to Stan Lee and he goes, I want you to create a superhero team. Stan Lee goes, hooks up with Jack Kirby, the artist, and says, I've been told I have to create a superhero team. That gives us the Fantastic Four. And Stan Lee, as he often did, and actually I should say before Pete Von Scialli, if Pete Von Scialli sees this, he always says Stan Lee gets too much credit. Jack Kirby deserves equal credit for the way these characters were created. I should say that. Yes. But effectively, the two of them and whatever bullpen was going on at the time of other authors and talent basically go, whoa, Justice League has all these secret identities. Our superhero team won't have any of that. They're just going to come out and say, hey, I'm Reed Richards. I'm Mr. Fantastic, right? We're not going to do that. And they're going to be a family. They're not going to be people that come together and then go off on their own separate adventures. They're going to be a family. And that was what the Fantastic Four was. Well, not surprisingly, that was a huge success.
Right.
And Marvel Comics sales started to go up. And he goes back and he says, hey, why don't you do that again? Create something else. And he does. He creates the Jekyll and Hyde character, the Incredible Hulk. And that goes over well. And you would think Stan Lee and Jack Kirby are going to go back and say, man, we got it. He's going to let us do whatever he wants. And that's what they thought too. And they go back and they're like, we've got this character. We got this idea. He's going to be a teenager. He's not an adult. He's going to be a teenager. He's going to get powers. And he's not going to want to be good at first. He's going to learn a lesson that makes him become good. Effectively, the great power with great responsibility. And of course, Martin Goodman looked at it and went, "No, you're not going to do that. That's a stupid, stupid idea." And Lee and at that time Kirby go, "Why? What do you mean it's a stupid idea? We've broken all the conventions of that other company and had success breaking those conventions. Why don't we have a teenage superhero?" And this literally is Martin Goodman's list of reasons why not. People hate spiders.
Yeah.
Teenagers can only be sidekicks. A superhero shouldn't have any problems other than, of course, crime.
Mm-hmm.
He should be handsome and glamorous and always popular. And so Goodman basically effectively tried to veto their idea. Now, Kirby was originally working on what would become Spider-Man. And if you go back and read the history of this, Stan Lee, because he had great success working with Kirby, Fantastic Four, Hulk, all that stuff, he wanted to continue that. However, if you read the history of it, Kirby's original ideas that he worked with Stan Lee on, according to several sources, were very, very different. And he was trying to keep Martin Goodman happy. And this is a Spider-Man we almost got, which is going to sound very much like a Fawcett publication. Kirby created a 5-page story about a teenager who had a magic ring that when he needed to would turn him into an adult hero called Spider-Man. By the way, Spider-Man was also almost Mosquito Man. They couldn't use Bug Man. That was already copyrighted. So at that point, it's still getting vetoed by Goodman. Stan Lee approaches Steve Ditko, another artist. Ditko ends up being the artist that works, redesigns the Spider-Man character, makes it the teenager that we all know. And Martin Goodman finally says, "Listen, there's this magazine that's selling, Amazing Fantasy. I'll give you the last 11 pages. Nobody's going to care about this. I don't like the story. Nobody's going to care about a teenage superhero. You get 11 pages, publish it there. We're canceling that magazine soon anyway." And that's how it first appeared.
Well, he went on record, well, not anymore, but went on record many times going, you wouldn't even tell people that what he did for a living and make something else up.
Yeah, he would say he's in books.
He would say he's in books and publishing it because no one wanted to be a comic book writer, and he was tired of it. He was done. And then it was his wife who encouraged him and said, "Well, if you're going to quit, write one the way you'd want to write it." Right.
And by the way, so when this 11 pages finally sees its print in Amazing Fantasy, and it ended up being more than 11 pages, Amazing Fantasy was on its final issue. It was going out. It ended up becoming
Final Fantasy number 15.
Yep. It ended up becoming their biggest selling book
of
that entire year. And of course, at that point, Martin Goodman swallowed his pride and said, "You know what, guys, I think we should give this Spider fellow another look." And that put the wheels in motion. And again, that also led to a ton of different feelings across history. And again, Pete Von Schalle, who we've had on the show before, has publicly said he has some issues with Stan Lee. And it is true. Stan Lee got a lot of credit for a lot of what other people did as well. But it also, that decision obviously affected the relationship of Lee and Kirby. It affected, obviously, Ditko got a lot of attention that Kirby was getting. And eventually Kirby would go to work for that competitor that Chad prefers. And then he would come back and work for Marvel. He basically became freelance over time until, unfortunately, he passed away he's pretty old. I do, by the way, I love, if you ever get a chance, kids, YouTube Jack Kirby. And if you can find Jack Kirby talking about how you should handle Nazis, it is one of the, there's a video of him I think he's in his 70s. And somebody says something about, you drew Captain America punching Hitler before America got involved in the war. Was that okay? And his response usually is, there's a couple different interviews where he brings it up, but he goes, "Listen, I'm all for anybody that will punch a Nazi in the mouth." I love that line. But anyway, so that Martin Goodman almost killed what actually ended up in some ways saving his company. And so that's the story I wanted to tell, because it really is fascinating to think that had Lee and Kirby, giving Kirby his due, and Ditko just went, the editor says no, and backed down, we might not have got that character. At least not the way and time that we did.
And then, of course, Stan Lee says he got his inspiration for this character because he saw a fly climbing up a wall. That's what he said for years. But I think in his autobiography, it actually says that after that, he does not even know if that's true anymore. He just told it so many times that he thinks that that's where the origin came from for the character.
And let's pause right there and talk about memory. And there's a phrase that I like, and it's called basically rearranging the furniture and how memory goes. And sometimes people remember things differently than other people, and no one's lying.
Yeah.
And no one's lying. A good example of this is Robert Englund talking about giving Mark Hamill the script to Star Wars because they're roommates, right? Have you guys ever heard this? Robert Englund does this a lot at conventions. Well, the problem is they were roommates. They did know each other, but Mark Hamill's like, for years, I have let him tell this story. And finally, someone asked him on the radio, and he goes, he dines out on this story. And I get it, but it's just not true. We all had the script to Star Wars. There's everybody in town auditioned for the damn thing. He didn't just get me in that. I didn't come in as like, oh, I'm going to go audition for this now. I became Luke. There was 3 different sets of 3 people. They didn't go with just one, like we'll put Harrison here and we'll have, is it Katz here or whoever? It was like, they're either going to do these 3 or these 3 or these 3. People rearrange things. And then you tell it so often, just like Chad's like, it is the truth. You hook you up to a lie detector and it's the truth. I don't remember a lot of our episodes. Most people don't remember what they did on their own work 3 weeks ago.
Well, we could go off Spider-Man and go into the current political environment, but we're not going to do that.
Well, no, but I was about to say, going back to actually, and what I do love about, and I am a bigger Marvel fan than I am DC. And I think one of the challenges for me as DC is that the characters are so, Batman probably the least so, but the character is so rigid. Like, it's hard to do a Superman story where you're worried about Superman.
Right.
Yeah, and honestly, other than Green Lantern, all of my favorite DC heroes are, lower level who, again,
they're
don't
sluts.
have that.
They're people you can see. Like, it's like, that's
like Booster Gold.
Booster Gold.
It's
the question, the creeper.
I think
the question. What is the question?
He's just a private.
It's where you ask something looking for information, Joe.
Oh,
he's just a private. He's a private detective who wears a mask that looks like he has no facial features. It's pretty. He's a pretty cool character in my opinion.
So Rorschach.
No, Rorschach. It changes.
Yeah.
He just
question came first.
Well, yeah. I mean, Watchmen, because originally they wouldn't let Alan Moore do what he wanted to do with established DC
wasn't
characters.
The question going? Wasn't Rorschach going to be the question?
I believe so,
and
because it was going to be an entire Batman kind of thing, and they would say you can't do that with Batman.
And Night Owl was going to be Blue Beetle. Yeah.
But one of the things, though, going back to this, you've got to understand, and I think that's the fact that these publishers, yes, they were competitors, but they played golf together. I mean, some of the muckety mucks were playing golf together. I mean,
I think it's important when you said earlier bullpen.
Yeah.
If I've learned nothing else from my side gig over the few years, that bullpen is really important. The fact that I'm here, Frank Miller's down here, and then we end up having a conversation and we talk through something, and then Frank goes and writes it or I go and write it. That there's a bullpen of different people and different writes. So, for example, there's the shit that we've done. Most of the time we can look at it and go, well, that sounds like the other one. It sounds like me. But I mean, 10 years later, could you go back and say for certain?
Well, I mean, and we've talked about this before because I love Man-Thing and Swamp Thing. The guys that created those lived together. I mean, they were it's kind of the Mark Hamill story.
I prefer Swamp Thing. He's in the I'd have to think about it. He might be in the top 10 for me as well.
I prefer Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Does that make sense? Like when Alan Moore took it over and made it Swamp Thing, when it wasn't just a generic, that's fascinating. That is a great storyline. Anyway, but I mean, everybody's like, well, which one came first? And it's like, well, technically Marvel copyrighted Man-Thing first. I'm like, yeah, but if you talk to the creators, they were like, yeah, we both were sitting around going, oh, I'm supposed to create a muck monster. Oh, yeah, how are you doing it? Well, mine's going to do that. Okay, that sounds cool. But anyway, to that level, though, you also have to play Spider-Man in that context, right?
Yeah.
Because where does Spider-Man work, at least in the beginning? He sells photos to a newspaper. Mm-hmm. That is a commentary on, again, all they did was take Clark Kent Clark Kent was mild, he was meek, but he was also Superman. But he was well liked at the Daily Planet. He was not going to be laid off. He was well respected by Perry White, et cetera, et cetera. Does Spider-Man get that? No, he gets J. Jonah Jameson, which may be one of the greatest anti-heroes that doesn't have a power, doesn't do anything else, but has complicated that hero's life more than anything else. And by the way, I don't care if it's in the cartoons or in the films or in the comics, that is a great character.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because he's not a villain. Perry White is heroic. J. Jonah Jameson is not, but he's not a villain either.
He's a capitalist.
Yeah. And he wants that. And so, and he's one of my favorite. And by the way, why am I blanking on the actor? What's his name? Whiplash.
J.K. Simmons.
J.K. Simmons. J.K. Simmons does it great because I love that entire. I know fruit basket. We'll send you a fruit basket. Yeah, that entire. We're gonna whatever. But if you put that in the context of what was going on in Superman comics, where he's an ace reporter. Yeah, he's mild, he's meek, he's a commentary on humanity, whatever. You can do the entire Kill Bill line. But Spider-Man doesn't get that. Spider-Man doesn't have an employer that's supportive. He gets, we're not even going to hire you. You're going to do everything freelance. Best of luck. You better get a good photo, or Aunt May ain't going to get her meds and she's going to die, and that's on you.
Well, and the cool thing is, and we're going to hop between this and some movies, and we'll get to the movies more later. They actually do put a scene in the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man, and it's throwaway. And it wasn't until I've had to rewatch it so many times that I realized he defends Peter Parker when the Green Goblin picks him up and he goes, "They just come in the mail." He's defending Peter Parker. He is watching out.
Well, and you now see that online, right? They put that scene online. They're like, what you do under stress proves who you really are. And it's very much true. Like
I've never seen that online before. In fact, I never even paid attention to it.
Well, see, J. Jonah, he's not really, I don't think he's defending Peter Parker as he is a tried and true journalist. You protect your sources. You don't
really. I think he's just defending somebody who works for him.
No, I really, if you look at J. Jonah Jameson and other,
because I don't think of him as
like the animated
muckraker.
Well, no, he started out as a journalist, though. He's all about the news, even though he is a muckraker. He's all about, depending on which version you're looking at.
That's the thing that we got to get.
Sometimes it's all about, and again, it's all about which version of Jonah you're looking at. And James, you can back me up or correct me. There's some where he's looking at ratings. There's some where he's looking about selling papers. And then there's some where he's just, this is not how life is supposed to be. There's not supposed to be a man in a mask swinging by and
without repercussions.
Yeah.
He's right. That was
I was going to say, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's why J. Jonah Jameson is a fascinating character, because one of the things, like J. Jonah Jameson has a son who eventually becomes, a Spider-Man villain in his own right.
Yeah.
And then a hero in a way. But anyway.
With one of the dumbest names in one of those dumb names in comic books.
What is it? Tell everybody in case they don't know.
Is it Moonwolf?
I thought it was Manwolf.
Manwolf. You're right. It's Manwolf. Moonwolf is a different character. Sadly, there's a lot of blank wolf names.
Just like Batman has a villain named Man-Bat.
But he's actually a bat.
He actually turns into a bat. Yes.
Why isn't he Batman?
Because that name was taken.
Because
hold on. Once again, let me do a throwback to an old episode.
By who? Spider-Man?
I would say let me do a throwback to he's in that same line with the creature from Jeepers Creepers trying to get his license plate for bee eating you. He gets up to the counter and goes, "I'd like to register the name Batman." And, that name's taken, man. By who? That billionaire over there. Cursed capitalist. Anyway.
I love how we still haven't gotten to the history.
The most unbelievable part of that movie is not him flying. It's him being able to start that truck that's been setting for 20-some years.
I say the custom tag still gets
the custom tag throw. It's a fun thing.
Jay,
don't think about it.
It doesn't matter. No, it's popcorn entertainment. But J. Jonah Jameson in the comic, one of the things that is a great storyline for him that makes him a compelling character is like he gets really upset because his son's an astronaut.
Yeah.
Who did how much years of training, how much years of blah, 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 blah. And eventually Spider-Man has to save him. Something goes wrong with the launch, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, one of his arguments in the comic is, my son trained, my son did this, my son is a national hero, but who gets the credit? The guy that won't even tell us who he is. This guy that we could be anything. He could be, the comics were written in the 60s. He could be a communist. He could be a blah, blah. It doesn't matter. He won't reveal who he is. Whereas my son has to, before we'll let him do anything. There's background checks, there's security, there's all that stuff. And that is, as Joe said, that's a valid point.
And this is one of my favorite J. Jonah Jameson moments in comics. One of my favorite comics is the New Avengers. We won't go into that but Spider-Man is a member of the New Avengers. I don't know if we'll get into that in the history of this, but they decide to go public that this is the new team. This is the new team of the Avengers. And they know they're going to have a problem with Jonah. So Tony Stark invites J. Jonah in for an exclusive to meet the new team. And he walks in and sees Spider-Man hanging on the wall. And he goes, what is he doing here? And they do this long back and forth with Jonah about how he has proven himself time and time again. You need to treat him with respect. And they go back and forth, and they even give him some leeway of going, you will be the first to report our stories. We will give you exclusives. Leave Spider-Man alone. And Jonah says, I will think about it. And he immediately leaves and writes a scathing article about every single member of the New Avengers. And it just blasts everybody away. And Peter Parker at that point is so used to it. He goes, I told you this was going to happen. It's one of the, and I'm not doing it justice. You should see the panel art of just J. Jonah stone-faced as every one of the Avengers is looking down at him and going, this is how it is. And he will not relent because that's what he believes. Again, like James says, one of the most interesting characters in comic book history. So should we go more into the history, James? My next notion is 1965. I don't know what you have. If you have anything between 62 and 65.
So, like I said, it was a hit from the beginning. And immediately they were like, we got to start getting this everywhere, right? Fantastic Four was selling well, but then all of a sudden, what if Spider-Man met the Fantastic Four? So one of the early crossovers, Spider-Man has all those failings of a teenager. He has all those failings of a working class family teenager. And so his Uncle Ben gets killed. We all know the origin. Do I need to do a 2-hour origin summary?
No.
We don't need to go into the origin.
The best thing about Homecoming was no origin.
We went ahead. We knew the origin at that point. But anyway, so obviously his
and that was one of the best things about the Batman too, because if it didn't, it would have been another hour long. And it was already torturous the way that it was. I'm sorry, DC fans.
I know. I argue with somebody, but they finally made him an investigator or a crime. I was like, God, it's just
just focus on the one thing that they did right, not all the other.
But God. So they end up having him meet the Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
But when he originally approaches the Fantastic Four, if you ever read the issue, the first meeting, he breaks in effectively to prove to them how good he is because he thinks they get paid. Reed Richards makes his money because he's a scientist and he's an expert, and Ben Grimm's a test pilot and all of that stuff. And so when he gets there and goes, what, you risk your life and you still get nothing for it? And he already had the great power, great responsibility experience, but he was like, wait a second. I still have, he can't tell him I've got to take care of Aunt May. Aunt May's going to lose her house. She needs her medication. And she's the only person I've got left. So he tries to join the Fantastic Four because he thinks they can pay him. And I think those sorts of storylines are very, very interesting. Again, if you put them in the time period, 1950s, obviously we're over, but there's an entire documentary about how the 1950s, the reason we saw a lot of teenagers in films is that's when teenagers started to have a little bit of money. They had a little bit of independence. The war was over. There was more cash flowing toward younger people. You get a job at the Five and Dime. And so this kind of parallel by the time we get to the 60s of, what does that mean when the money starts to dry up, when things do start to tighten up again? And Spider-Man was also a commentary on all of that. And so Spider-Man ends up doing gets pulled into a lot of series. And we know now there's, 4 or 5 different Spider-Man comics every month. But that was kind of unique at the time. Marvel all of a sudden realized, we can do Marvel team up where it's just Spider-Man meets blah, blah, blah. And do it once a month, once every 2 months, and it'll sell. Anyway, go ahead, Chad.
No, I was just going to talk about 1964. In Amazing Spider-Man 14 is when we saw the creation of probably his version of the Joker. If Spider-Man has a Joker, it would be the Green Goblin.
Yeah, because he's I mean, throughout Spider-Man comic history, he has, quote unquote, much like the Joker, died and came back.
All right.
Just hounded him at every turn.
This is where I'm going to stop you. And before we started, I said I'm going to ask some stupid questions, and bear with me as we go through this, because I want to be the guy that represents the people who don't know as much as me. So this is where I get confused. Technically, the Hobgoblin came first, or the Green Goblin? I think it's the Hobgoblin. Which one came first in the comics, gentlemen?
Green Goblin. I think Green Goblin was first. And so,
but you all don't know for sure.
I know, I'm pretty sure, because Amazing Spider-Man 14 is pretty early on in that run.
Mm-hmm.
Because
who was his first villain? Do you guys know?
Hobgoblin didn't get created until 1983.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So yeah.
So the cartoon is a little misleading from the 90s.
Yeah. No, the cartoon follows some of the comic book story arcs, but it does change things a lot just to fit that overall theme.
So who is his first villain? Does anybody know?
I mean, the first villain, and who briefly comes back, is the guy that killed Uncle Ben.
Okay.
I mean, because he does come back and eventually he dies. Mm-hmm. Now, he is a character that died and has stayed. Nobody's ever wrote that comic. You know, guys, what we should do? Let's bring back the guy that killed Uncle Ben.
Well, they bring him back every damn time that they do a reboot.
I mean, if you want to get the last one. If you want to get into the specifics of like the villains with superpowers, the first Spider-Man villain was the Chameleon. He premiered in March 1963.
Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah,
and it was in the initial issue of the Amazing Spider-Man.
Okay, so the Green Goblin, what makes him so interesting? Has he always been Harry Osborn, or
well, it's Norman
Osborn?
Norman, and then sometimes Harry. Yeah,
right.
And I think there's actually a couple more people thrown in there as well.
So originally, you want to know the origin of what the Green Goblin was going to be, Joe?
I think our audiences want to know all these things, these obscure things.
It was going to be a monster. It was not going to be a human in a costume. So originally, Stan's write-up, which Ditko said, "Nah, let's not do that," it was going to be about a movie crew filming a horror movie on location in Egypt. And they open up a sarcophagus, because we all know movies are actually filmed in the pyramids for mummy movies.
I mean, you got to go on location sometimes.
And they open it up, and there's a mythological demon, the Green Goblin, inside. They release it, and Spider-Man has to deal with it. Well, Steve Ditko, I would say arguably correctly, goes, whoa, that's a lot to introduce, especially that early in Spider-Man. We haven't dealt with the supernatural yet. He's still dealing with petty thieves, and like the Chameleon, it's a guy that he's an actor. He's not going toe to toe with cosmic horror. And so they changed it up effectively. And so when the Green Goblin debuted, we did not know who he was.
Right.
That was actually part of the mystique. We didn't know, that's Norman Osborn right there. It was just, oh my God, there's this guy coming after Spider-Man. And so I'm just glancing at my notes.
By the way, the creature element of Green Goblin being a creature, that would be revisited in the Ultimate Spider-Man series, where they basically turn Green Goblin into a giant goblin monster, which in my opinion was a bad call.
So how close is the Raimi movie to the original of him just doing the super serum or whatever it is, of Norman Osborn?
It was it really did start as a representation of his paranoia or whatever. So some of that is pretty accurate. Now, how he got to that point. One of the things that, and this is actually, as Joe said, the history gets distorted, but both Stanley
and the comics keep redoing them.
Oh yeah. Well, and then all of a sudden you find out what about this? Like,
right.
Spider-Man, you mentioned earlier, Spider-Man, his power, it depends on the movie. Well, as Chad also said, it depends on the comic. And they've even addressed that in the comics. I mean, there's been storylines about, Spider-Man's strength depends on who needs it, right? I mean, there used to be, when I was a kid in the 80s, about every third Spider-Man comic, he would be beat down, which is another reason I love the character. He got beat. You'd see blood coming out of his face, and then he would be under something, and then he would start basically, I refer to it as the chant, you've got to do it for Aunt May, you've got to do it for Mary Jane, you've got to do it for X, Y, and Z. And then he'd kind of come back. He would make himself, he'd force himself to get through it. And matter of fact, that's even made fun of. Spider-Man once crossed over with Powdered Toast Man from Ren and Stimpy. I have the comic. It's great because there's an entire scene where Spider-Man's beat down. He's actually, the entire building has fallen on him, and he starts going through it. You got to do it for Aunt May. You got to do it for Mary Jane. You've got to do it for, and the panels just keep going until you got to do it for little Timmy, who met you once in the Dollar General, and he really needs you to get up, man. And then he finally comes back and he actually says, man, that took more this time. I must be really beat up. It's a great scene. But so the story that they do agree with, Stan Lee and John Romita Sr., John Romita Jr. is an artist as well, but they both agree and they both remember it the same. Stan Lee said, okay, if we're going to do this as a human character, it has to be somebody he knows. We don't have to reveal it right away, but eventually it has to leave out. So this is a quote directly from Stan Lee when they were talking about it. Steve Ditko. Steve wanted him to turn out to be some character that we had never seen before because he said in real life, very often a villain turns out to be somebody you just never knew. And I felt that would be wrong. I felt in a sense it would be cheating the reader. If it's somebody you didn't know and had never seen, then what was the point of following all the clues? I think that just frustrates the reader. Now, Lee does preface that statement by saying, I do have a poor memory, but Steve Ditko remembered enough of it similarly that he was like, yeah, that sounds fair. Yeah. So eventually we do find out in one panel.
Right.
And Spider-Man comics did this for a long time. The last issue of a panel, it would be, somebody just take a mask off and reveal who they were. Scooby-Doo it, right? Mm-hmm. We find out that it's Norman Osborn. And that didn't happen until issue 37. So, by the way, do the math. One issue a month, introduced in issue 14. You waited almost 2 years?
Almost 17 years.
Joe's not good at math, but almost 2 years to find out who this Green Goblin was.
I'm taking a picture of all of us, by the way. I need to do better with our social media. Keep going.
But anyway, so yeah. And then, by the way, Ditko left the series the next issue.
Yeah. Did this caused it to fall apart? Are you going to go into why?
No, go ahead, Chet.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm sick of listening to James.
So Lee in 2017 basically said, like when they were revealing this, they had a big argument about who the character was going to be. Lee wanted it to be Harry Osborn, but Ditko said he didn't want it to be. He wanted it to be a character that basically nobody was really familiar with. Mm-hmm. Because Ditko's argument was, well, in real life, the bad guy doesn't always turn out to be somebody you know. Mm-hmm. And of course, Lee had the final say, and that's what caused Ditko to leave. He just did not like that idea. And I also believe
it works really well. I have to agree with Steve on this one because it just works really well. Him knowing Peter works.
Yeah.
It just builds tension. It's a whole other layer of drama.
Right. You have the Batman and the Joker, Joker doesn't know who Batman is. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's just, those are two agents of chaos. I mean, it's just, one's an agent of one is a order, the other is chaos. Watch them clash. Yeah. These are two people who are the same thing, but there's the personal rivalry of, I know who you are. You're my son's friend and you're fighting me at every corner. I'm going to destroy you. It's and the lengths that they both will go to address that. I mean, the Green Goblin in some ways is more terrifying than the Joker because, well, I guess they are a lot alike in that he'll just take what you love and he'll do whatever it takes to get to. I mean, killing Gwen Stacy is probably one of the most important storylines in comics. I mean, because when Green Goblin basically commits to, I'm going to kill Gwen Stacy. Yeah.
I'm going to take away the person you love, the person you thought you were going to marry, the person that you thought might give you that normal life. And I'm going to take it. And then you're going to have to make a choice.
And that was in 1973 in Amazing Spider-Man number 121. And after the character was killed, Jerry Conway?
Jerry Conway, yeah.
Jerry Conway, the writer of that story, actually started getting death threats.
Yeah.
Really? For killing Gwen Stacy. Because she was and that's the problem is now, well, with the exception of the Amazing Spider-Man briefly, Gwen Stacy's kind of now she's Spider Stacy. She's Ghost Spider Stacy, whatever you want to call her.
But it's another universe, right?
It's another universe. But up until recently, she's kind of been a forgotten character. But back then in 1973, they killed off Spider-Man's love, and it sent fans into an uproar.
Yeah, but because it was the one thing he had, right? I mean, he was still a struggling student. Yeah. He was still trying to do everything. And the one thing we finally, it was the one, Gwen Stacy and Aunt May. It was the two things he had that he could go back to and that let him just be Peter, and then none of it mattered. It was all taken away. And to that point, though, Joe, speaking of Green Goblin, Conway is also the one that said, let's go ahead and make Harry Osborn the new Green Goblin. And actually fans responded to that pretty directly because they went, yeah, he's way creepier than his dad was.
Yeah.
Which tells you a little bit about how they wrote that character. But
yeah, it doesn't work in the movie, but it worked in the comics.
Well, it works in the comics because Norman Osborn in the comics is such it shows a little bit in the movie, but he's brilliant. He's a genius. Matter of fact, I think in some ways, No Way Home does a great job of showing it when the little interactions between Otto Octavius and Norman Osborn, they're both brilliant, right? But Norman Osborn has a cruelty to him when he needs to that Doc Ock doesn't have.
Right.
And so this kind of back and forth that we see of what it means. And so to think about if you were raised in an environment where if you weren't number one, to borrow from the epic film Talladega Nights, if you're not first, you're last.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, even your father goes, your friend Peter's better than you. He's smarter than you. Even though he's a nerd, he's more capable than you. And you've grown up in that environment, but that's still your friend. But then when all of a sudden you snap and you start taking the serum, it's going to make sense that's why Harry Osborn in some ways was more terrifying. Plus he was younger. And also he was your age equal.
And it didn't work in the movies because it was James Franco.
Yeah. James Franco is miscast as that. Probably fine as the friend at the beginning, but it doesn't work.
So I want to take a brief detour off Green Goblin because we jumped to 1973. I want to jump back to 1967. Only 5 years after the character was created. Do you all realize that we got the first animated series for Spider-Man, which gave us one of the most important theme songs ever. Spider-Man.
And I think it's extremely important, Chad, because a 4-year-old can sing it.
Yeah. And it was also used in one of the most popular movies of all time, Biodome. Anybody remember that? Pauly Shark was Iron Man. And then, oh God, what's his name? Ghostbusters. William Atherton corrects him and goes, "You're thinking of Spider-Man."
By the way,
hilarious.
Real quick, the thing about that is, that song is remembered.
Yeah.
But there were other Marvel cartoons. My father used to really enjoy the Iron Man one, right? Tony Stark, it makes you feel he's a cool exec with a heart of steel. He's also Iron Man. There were a lot of those cartoons. Spider-Man's the one that's remembered.
Yeah.
Nobody, you didn't get an Iron Man reference to the Iron Man theme song from the 60s cartoon or late 60s, early 70s cartoons. That didn't happen. Thor also had one. Over the rainbow bridge of Asgard, where the booming heavens soar, you'll behold in mighty wonder the god of thunder, mighty Thor. I have the cartoon. But they were from the late 60s. So Chad's absolutely right. I mean, these were cultural catch-ons quick, even though it took us forever to get a good movie.
And that Spider-Man show lasted 3 seasons. So I mean, it was on TV for 3 years, just busting out cartoons on Spider-Man. So it was a success. Mm-hmm. And James, do you have anything else you want to talk? Because I'm going to jump to 1974.
Real quick, Joe, you may find this interesting. What? You asked about his early villains. So as Chad said, the Chameleon was first, then the Vulture. That was Amazing Spider-Man 2. We get the Vulture. And the Vulture originally, despite being played by Michael Keaton, was a late 60s, early 70s, effectively a cat burglar.
Yeah.
Who, again, though, was a brilliant scientist. Spider-Man always fought scientists.
So not like in the movie.
No. Spider-Man 3, we do get Doc Ock. So we literally first 3 issues, Chameleon, Vulture, Doc Ock, they're knocking out of the park. Spider-Man 4, Sandman.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 5, Doctor Doom. It's the first crossover with the villain from Fantastic Four. Spider-Man 6, you get the Lizard. The least known, here's one that you're not going to know, Joe. I'm assuming. I don't mean to count you out.
No, it's fine.
It's one that I very rarely remember. So issue 7, we skip because Vulture comes back. Issue 8, they introduce the Spider-Man villain, the Living Brain, as opposed to all the dead brains that we deal with every day.
I've actually never heard of that one, so that was a new one on me too.
It's in issue 8. I don't think you're going to see the Living Brain make too many comebacks. He's been in the comics since then. I think he was reused a couple times. But then we get to Spider-Man 9. Amazing Spider-Man 9 is when you get Electro. And then we're going to start kind of fading down. You do get a supervillain team he fights, which nobody remembers, though they have also appeared a couple times since. That would be the Enforcers. They are a leader. They're basically circus actors. The leader is Big Man and his minions, and let me name them: Montana, Fancy Dan, and Ox. And so they're basically circus performers who think they can just tie him up, rope him, kind of a Wild West sideshow act. But then 13, we get Mysterio.
Yeah.
And 15, we get Kraven the Hunter. Then we get Weird again. This is actually a team that went on to fight, oddly enough, Ghost Rider and several other people. The Circus of Crime.
Every comic book has to have a clown-based, circus-based criminal organization. I don't understand it.
When were circuses this popular, by the way?
It's
never in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
It's an entire commentary on carnies, is what it is.
Well, and it's the 1960s. I mean, that was your thing. You would go to the circus.
I guess.
Yeah.
And then, so real quick, rounding out his other early villains, we get the Scorpion.
Yeah.
We get the Beetle, oddly enough, not used in too many live action films yet, but pretty big in the comics, pops up quite a bit. And then actually going back to J. Jonah Jameson in issue 25, you get the Spider Slayers. And that was an interesting storyline. It's the first time J. Jonah Jameson gets so tired of dealing with Spider-Man, he puts forth money and says, I will fund anybody that can stop the menace. And so the Spider Slayers are these robots and these creations of, I forget the villain's name that creates them. But anyway, they're robots that are created solely to take away Spider-Man's advantages. So they're resistant to his webbing, blah, 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 and they're supposed to take him down. And J. Jonah Jameson funds it all. And it's the first time he took a direct act to stop Spider-Man. And so those are the first 15 supervillains Spider-Man fought from Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 25. There you go, Joe.
Yeah, and I lied. I'm actually not going. I said I was going to jump to 1974. I'm actually going to stay in 1967, where we got the first animated series. But I do want to talk about one of the more famous Spider-Man comic books. It actually has one of the most memorable artworks of Spider-Man. That would be Spider-Man number 50. And this is used quite a bit in Spider-Man number 2, the Sam Raimi one. This is where Spider-Man decides to give up being, or Peter Parker decides to give up being Spider-Man. And if you know this comic book cover, it shows Peter Parker walking with his head down as he's just given up. and a giant red version of Spider-Man behind him. It's one of the most popular comic book covers in American history, in my opinion. It's one of those ones that comes to mind when you think of great comic book art. But yeah, and it's like I said, a lot of it is used for Spider-Man 2. He ends up getting tired of getting beat up. So and J. Jonah Jameson's nonsense. So he throws his outfit into a trash can where some kid finds it, gives it to J. Jonah Jameson. You see all of this except in Spider-Man 2, it's the grown ass man from Simple Plan.
I love that introduction. Please let that be
the actual best Sam Raimi movie.
Yes. And then but by the end of that issue, he's back in his outfit, becoming Spider-Man again. Also in 1971 is when we got the 6-arm Spider-Man, where he has he concocts a serum to detox all the spider junk out of his genes. You see this in the animated series, which we'll get into later on, but it essentially causes him to grow 6 arms. So that is one of the more popular images of Spider-Man, is him with, the 4 regular arms outside of his costume. And he battles the Lizard and Morbius duke it out to who gets to kill him. And of course, the Lizard in that comic book decides, as the Lizard does, he's James says
what?
That Green Goblin, and honestly, they both are. Green Goblin's kind of the Jekyll and Hyde character, but the Lizard is kind of more of the Jekyll and Hyde character, because they actually conflict with one another, because the Lizard is this rampaging beast, but at the same time, sometimes Connors comes out and prevents the Lizard from doing horrible things. So we talked about Gwen Stacy dying. So now I'm going to jump to 1974, unless James, you have something.
No. I actually was wondering if your 74 is going to intersect with what I was going to talk for 74. So go ahead.
Okay. So you jump in with me. 1974, we actually get the live action debut of Spider-Man.
Yep.
That is it is on the PBS TV show, The Electric Company. Joe, do you know anything about The Electric Company?
I mean, they charge me fucking every month.
It was also
guys.
It was also one of the most amazing.
I'm familiar with The Electric Company, but
it's one of the most. Well, it's one of the. It was one of the first acting jobs of one Morgan Freeman.
Right.
Morgan Freeman. Literally, the cast on The Electric Company. Zero Mostel did 650 episodes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Bill Cosby did 260. I don't know if you ever heard of Bill Cosby, Joe. Look him up.
No. Do it on your work computer.
Did Fat Albert appear on The Electric Company, or am I making that up?
I don't know that. I should know. Rita Moreno is the one that yelled, "Hey, you guys," originally. As a matter of fact, everybody thinks it happened in the beginning. It didn't start until she did on the 19th episode.
So I didn't know that. I know that much about Electric Company. I really was confused. I'm like, why is James quoting Goonies?
Yeah, no, it begins from episode 19 forward, effectively. But I also want to mention, because in 780 episodes, now some of them were reused footage, obviously, but Mel Brooks was part of the Electric Company. Just the immense amount of talent. Carol Burnett, Lily Tomlin, Mel Blanc, all these people, Gene Stapleton, Dean Martin. I mean, they all popped up in the Electric Company. So if you're going to have Dean Martin, you have to have Spider-Man.
Sure.
I don't literally go back, Joe. Go back and watch the original Ocean's 11 and ask yourself, now what if it was Ocean's 12? And they were like, "What do you think, Peter?" And then Spider-Man just webbed away. Somebody said that would have been a fun movie. Ocean's 11 meets Spider-Man. Watch it. I'd watch it.
I don't know much about this one either, James. I don't know if you do, but it also, because of the success of his appearances on the Electric Company, Marvel launched a new aimed at kids Spider-Man series called Spidey Super Stories.
Yeah, I've got a couple issues of it. But they were really simple to read. They were to help kids learn to read. So they were aimed at younger population kids, but they usually featured characters from the Electric Company. But yeah, it was just a way to do that. And by the way, Marvel let them use Spider-Man for free. It was Marvel's goodwill project to help with public education.
Huh.
Do you know what else happened in 1974 along with that, James?
No, real quick, was Nicholas Hammond, did he play Spider-Man in the Electric Company and in the eventual show?
Well,
I'm making that up.
Why don't you look that up while I talk about what else happened in 1974, because I'm not sure about that, James. Also debuting in 1974, the Spider-Mobile.
Oh yeah, it's a van, right? I mean, I remember the comic.
No, it's a dune buggy.
You're right, it's a dune buggy.
Hold on, we were just all at Disney. It's not a dune buggy, it's a dune buggy.
Sure.
All right, go back to your damn Spider-Man.
Peter Parker needed money in 1974, and Corona Motors offered him a handsome paycheck to drive around town instead of using his trusty web lines. I should say this is from looper.com. Spider was unable to return the car to Corona because Mysterio tricked him into driving it straight into the Hudson in that very same new comic book story. So we did briefly get the Spider-Mobile in 1974.
By the way, I want to say, so it was not played by Hammond. Now, Nicholas Hammond would go on to play the live-action Spider-Man in the Spider-Man series.
Yeah, which we're going to be talking about next.
In the Electric Company, it was played by Danny Seagren, Seagren. And so from 1974 to 1977, Seagren portrayed the web slinger on the Electric Company. Now, the Spidey Super Stories, by the way, some of them have really great covers, and I know we can't share it to where our fans can see it, but I'm going to post one in the chat for you all. If it'll let me post an image, we'll see. It won't, but there's a great one where it's basically saying we will do whatever it takes to sell comic or to get kids to read. And it's a picture. I'll let you all guess when it came out. These comics, Spidey Super Stories, didn't have ads in. They literally, it was all pro bono, get kids to read stuff. But Joe, I'll let you guess what this may be alluding to. On the cover, there is a bald woman, who's kind of in a leaning pose, and Spider-Man has his hands up like so, holding what seems to be a laser type sword.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Doom is in the background, almost in the shape of, I don't know, a shark cresting the water, and it says Spidey Super Stories Star Jaws.
Why in the hell are they always ripping off Corman? Clearly, that's Battle Beyond the Stars.
It's Battle Beyond the Stars and Piranha. That's what it is. It's Star Jaws, Spidey Super Stories Star Jaws. That's issue 31 if you feel the need to track it down and add it to your collection to celebrate your love of both Piranha and Battle Beyond the Stars.
Right.
James, Evan, do you have anything between that?
No, go ahead.
All right. So 1977 was a busy year for Spider-Man. In 1977, a Spider-Man comic strip actually was written by Lee and illustrated by Romita. Is it Romita or Ramada?
I've always said Romita, but
I've always said Romita too. It premiered in the newspapers in January. The strip lasted. Anybody want to know how long the newspaper comic strip lasted?
1997. I'm stabbing in the dark.
Joe.
Probably till in the 80s.
2019.
Well, the reason, so I have a story about that I learned from Jim Shooter. One of Jim Shooter's first jobs was actually writing out the plot for the Spider-Man, because they wanted at this time, who was the editor after Stan? Because Stan was off in California doing the movie and the TV deals and all that.
Was it Quesada? Because Quesada, by the way, just left.
Because they wanted, no, it was somebody in between him and Jim Shooter after Stan and then Jim. I can't remember who it was. There's been several.
Yeah.
And that's how one of the ways him and Stan Lee hit it off was because he could plot, because Stan didn't want to write that much. He didn't really want to put that much effort. He didn't mind writing the dialogue, but he plotted out the actual he plotted out the plot.
Sorry, real quick. Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, Lynn Wein, Marv Wolfman, Jerry Conway, Archie Goodwin, Jim Shooter. There you go. Those are the
I've met 3 of those people.
Then it went Tom DeFalco, and then 1995 they actually didn't have an editor. It's called, they actually refer to it as the year without an editor, because they were having so many issues and so many different things going on that after DeFalco stepped down, they split it between 5 different people and said, just make it work.
Yep.
So also in 1977, as James mentioned, we got Nicholas Hammond starring in The Amazing Spider-Man. It lasted 13 episodes spread out over 2 seasons. Ratings were decent though. However, the Incredible Hulk series came out around that same time, and it ran for 80 episodes. So it was a little bit more successful than the actual Spider-Man. And have you all watched the live action Spider-Man series? Because even as a kid, I hated it.
No, I haven't watched it ever in my life. I've seen snippets of it. I've seen stupid memes from it, but I've never actually watched it.
I have watched it. I remember I liked it well enough as a kid. The problem was, even as a kid, I think when I was about 10 years old, USA, before the Sci-Fi Channel launched, every summer they would do, here's what we can get cheap.
Yeah.
And so it was Cartoon Express, and then they would say,
Express.
Here's some crap we didn't have to pay much for, but it will distract you long enough so your parents won't beat you. And they did Spider-Man one summer, and me and my brother watched it all. And even then, though, I was like, oh man, he goes to shoot a web, and it literally would cut to somebody obviously throwing a rope or throwing a net. And it was, they didn't have a budget. They couldn't do it the way it needed to be done. But I actually liked Hammond as trying to be that character. It's just so limited in so many different ways. But yeah.
So as we do the history of Spider-Man, I was just talking to Chad when message. We probably need to. We're going to have to break this up into a 2-parter.
Yeah. Let's finish 1970, and then we'll start out at So I do
1980, right?
Yeah, we'll start at 1980. I do want to mention one other thing that happened the next year in 1978. So we remember that cheesy live action. We remember the animated, but what a lot of people don't know is that in 1978, Japan jumped in on the success of Spider-Man and created their own version of Spider-Man. Now, the thing about the Spider-Man in Japan is it is related to nothing.
Did they license it, or did they just steal it?
No, they licensed it.
Okay.
I believe. But so it wore the same costume as Spider-Man, but that is where the similarities end. So not only is it so I'll just read a quick synopsis. Young motorcycle racer Tayuki Yamashiro sees a UFO falling to Earth, a space warship named the Marveler. His father is killed upon finding the spaceship. The incident also attracts the attention of Professor Monster and his evil Iron Cross Army, an alien group that plans to rule the universe. They find an alien who's the last surviving warrior of planet Spider, a world that was destroyed by Professor Monster and the Iron Cross Army. The alien goes on to explain that she needs someone to carry on the fight, and he injects Takura with some of his own blood. The blood of a person from Planet Spider gives him spider-like powers, and he is then given a bracelet from the dying alien that can activate his spider protector costume, shoot web lines, and control the Marveler ship, which also transforms into a giant robot called Leopardon. Using his powers, Taikuya fights Professor Monster's army and other threats to Earth under the name Spider-Man. So yeah, you have Spider-Man as a Power Ranger, essentially.
Basically.
And honestly, if you look at some of the episodes, he's actually a pretty cool character. The costume they use for the Japanese version, I think, supersedes the Nicholas Hammond version. The costume actually looks pretty cool. But yeah, it's just ridiculous some of the stuff they do with the character, because it is nothing like Spider-Man. He's an alien who has a giant robot named Leopardon. So there you go. That's the end of part 1 of Spider-Man.
Anything else to add to that, James?
No, I've got a complete rundown ready for the 1980s. So.
All right.
1980s, 1980s, 90s, and beyond for next episode.
And the movies. We'll get to the movies after them the next episode too. So thank you so much. This has been Bonehead. Please share the crap out of our Spider-Man.